This is Nadia with FilmSnobReviews.com, your melanin gifted movie critic. Today I'm very excited because this is my one and only Sundance interview with the wonderful director and participants of To the End. To the End particularly hit me. My editor, of course, said, this is a film for you. And the reason is because it goes into how the democratic process is affected, won by big money, and the people who are trying to change that, starting with the impact of the Green New Deal. So let me go ahead and go around and introduce my guests. Let's start with director Rachel Lears.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Nadia.
Hi, thank you. Do you want to just give us a little bit of breakdown of your previous films?
Yeah, well, my last film was Knock Down the House. It followed 4 working class women who were running insurgent congressional campaigns in 2018, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who won her campaign the year that we were following her, and Cori Bush, who won her campaign the following cycle in 2020, which is actually acknowledged in our current film, To the End.
Excellent, thank you. Next, we're going to go with Miss Alexandra Rojas, and Miss Rojas is the leader of Justice Democrats.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And do you want to just give us a little bit of what Justice Democrats incorporates and what they stand for?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are a grassroots group that is trying to transform the Democratic Party by electing a new generation of diverse, progressive, working class leaders into the halls of Congress. Rachel and I have known each other for almost 5 years now, and she's really seen the arc of the start from finish. But, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Jamal Bowman to Cori Bush to the rest of the squad that's in there, trying to, bring more working class folks into power.
Please correct me. That's so important to me, especially amongst BIPOC women. I think that we need to make sure that everybody understands that our names are important to us.
Yes.
Varshini Prakash?
It's Varshini.
Varshini. Thank you.
Varshini Prakash.
Varshini Prakash.
Prakash. Yep.
Excellent. And that's beautiful, by the way. The ED of the Sunrise Movement. And can you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about what the Sunrise Movement does?
Hey, yes. Thank you so much for having me on. Varshini Prakash. I'm the executive director of Sunrise, and we are building a youth force in this country to popularize a Green New Deal and elect candidates to office who will fight for our health and well-being. So we're really here to channel the frustration and fear and hope that young people have in this country into political vehicles for change.
That's amazing, thank you. And that actually segues into my first question. Ms. Lears, can you tell us what prompted you to make 2 outstanding films about the democratic process?
Yeah, well, To the End really grew out of our work on Knock Down the House. And in the fall of 2018, when we were in post for Knock Down the House, that was the year that the UN's climate report came out and said, we have to make major changes in all aspects of our society and economy by the year 2030 in order to avoid the worst effects of the climate crisis. And not only was that really attention grabbing to me at the time, but the way these scientists were framing it was that this is a question of political will and political courage. It's not a technical question. It's all within our grasp physically and technologically. And, as someone who had been working on a film that was already about how movements create the conditions of possibility to make impossible things possible, I wanted to look at how that would play out, how that process of creating political will to solve the climate crisis, what is that actually going to look like? And what is that going to look like in the United States, where I live, where I feel I have a responsibility to work and to change, to be part of changing the political conversation here. So I began speaking with the 4 incredible women that are profiled in the film, who were all key players behind the Green New Deal, which is a bold and ambitious plan to stop the climate crisis and address economic and racial inequality in the process. And the idea was to create a film that's going to interrogate the nature of power and explore what it's like for these young leaders to experience having one foot in the door of the halls of power, and just that negotiation of, having, in a sense, their movement, when we start off the film, has more power than it ever has had before, but still not quite enough to fully shape and set the agenda. So that negotiation process is, I think, part of the leadership journey that each of the four protagonists is on through the film, and that we're really trying to explore.
And it really was impactful to see, especially that this whole movement is being led by communities of color, by leaders of color. I thought that really translates to the lack of equity that is in these conversations that are happening on City Hall. I think that even AOC brought that to the forefront. How do you all feel it affects coming from these communities of color, coming from a different place than what you normally would see on Capitol Hill? How do you think that affects your conversation when you bring it forth?
Yeah. Well, I would say for a lot of the young people that we work with, this issue isn't in the abstract, right? There are young people who experienced the Texas freeze and were without power for days. We saw young people who fled fires. One of the opening scenes of the movie is me talking to a young member of Sunrise who had to flee from the from the fires that destroyed Paradise, California. People who have had to abandon their homes because of Hurricane Katrina. So this issue, which felt like 30 or 40 or 50 years in the future, for a lot of our young people, especially leaders of color and working class folks, it's not in the abstract. It's very real and it's very now. And so I think when that sense of this visceral need to take dramatic and transformational action meets the institutional inertia and this complete disconnect that so many of our politicians feel with people's lived realities, I mean, it's just, that's just a conflict waiting to happen. And it's not just on climate, it's on virtually every issue out there. And so I think our generation as a whole is having this moment of realizing a lot of the adults in the room and a lot of the politicians in charge at the helm of this country have been asleep at the wheel for some of the most pressing issues of our time for years. And it's our job to wake them up.
Yeah, I think, just to echo everything that Varshini said, I think is absolutely true of the unique perspective that I think communities of colors have faced in particular. And Rihanna talks a lot about this in the film, but even when we think about Green New Deal and looking back at the last old New Deal, it didn't include Indigenous people, it didn't include Black and brown folks, so they were purposely written out of it. So I think it was really critical, and it is really critical, which is why I think, at least through the lens of Justice Democrats and really supporting working class women of color that are coming from parts of the country that are often left behind, like Jessica Cisneros is featured in there. And that's a district that it's in Laredo, Texas, that, the Democrat that currently still represents it is, voted with Trump over 70% of the time. He is fossil fuels' biggest Democrat. He's big oil's biggest Democrat. He actually just was his house was raided by the FBI not too long ago. So this man is very, and those are some of the representatives that are, in representing our communities and being able to tell it from this perspective, from folks that are not only active in the movement, but I think also who have been historically left out of the process in crafting legislation like a Green New Deal, and also having the power to wield these decisions, even though it was, we didn't get quite there, but the fight always goes on. And that's been the story also of our communities.
So Rachel, I wanted to comment on that specifically because it actually comes back to how the film demonstrated these people who are in power, how they seem disconnected from the actual people they're representing. There was the scenes where Joe Biden interacted with some of the youth and he seemed kind of upset or angry. And then when you reached out to some of the Congress members, how they were like either too busy or just wanted to ignore and keep walking. How do you feel that that was important to the film to demonstrate how grassroots is kind of counter to what they're really supposed to be? They're supposed to be representing us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, this is a theme that I've been working on. This is my third film about multiracial coalition building. And you know, when we look at the climate issue, it's certainly no coincidence that there's so many compelling leaders in the climate justice movement that are young BIPOC women. I mean, across the world and the United States, young people, women, and people of color, often the most affected by the climate crisis and the inequality crises that we face. And I think it's just, you know, that the way those movements are strategically building a pathway into engaging with the halls of power is one of the central tensions of the film. So there's a really a couple of my favorite scene juxtapositions are between, you know, a scene where Representative Ocasio-Cortez is speaking about the way she thinks of herself as, you know, she says, sometimes I think it's my job to get my hands dirty working within these institutions, she means, so that activists and community organizers don't have to. And then and she begins to speak about, you know, corporate power and how much inertia there is in Washington, D.C. towards the special interests that line up with corporate interests. And then on the other hand, you know, in the next scene, Varshini speaks about how progressive movements too often shy away from engaging with electoral politics because it's too icky. And I think it's fascinating that they both use these words of, you know, hands dirty and icky. It's this like a sense of visceral distaste for the political process and the institutions that have failed our communities and failed ordinary working people in this country for so long. But I think that what the film shows is that in spite of how difficult it is to engage with those institutions, in spite of how intractable they are, we have no choice but to do that, because there's this edifice of power of racial capitalism that is it's all connected. It's you know, I think what we're trying to show in the movie, without being a lecture, you know, it's an entertaining film that's based on the stories of the people that we're following. But as you watch it, you'll begin to get a sense of the layers of how the politics of corporate power is connected to racial injustice and white supremacy, is connected to the climate crisis, and all of those layers are connected in ways that it's going to require this a multiracial, cross-class, intergenerational coalition to really break that stranglehold. And I hope the film gives people a sense that even though it's a tough uphill battle, it's happening, and everyone has a choice about being involved, and there's lots of ways to be part of it.
It's a great reflection on it. Thank you. And it does give a little bit of hope. I'll ask the two activists. Do you feel like, since you started filming, since you started all this process, how do you feel the climate has changed? Do you feel like you're breaking ground? Do you feel like there are more people that are not necessarily younger, but coming on board and realizing that there needs to be a drastic change?
No, I mean, I think the thing that does feel hopeful about the movie is how much can change if people are willing to take the risk to try. And even while we are in this sort of legislative purgatory of knowing where the remnants of Build Back Better and these policies will end up, and we don't know exactly how the rest of Biden's term will shape up, just to see 5 years ago, the climate crisis was like the third rail. Like, you don't touch it, you don't go near it, you don't mention it in an election. And to see it go from there to there are senators and Congress people who are winning and losing their campaigns based off of their position on this issue. There are 7 million kids that are like flooding the streets in every continent who are freaked about this issue and calling on their global leaders to take action. To see every single every major Democratic presidential candidate put out climate plans, the vast majority of which are like far better than any candidate has ever put out before, is astonishing. And all of that was possible because of movements. And I mean, movements like, Sunrise, but also political movements like Justice Democrats, the movement getting into the halls of Congress with AOC and the squad. And I think a lot has changed in the last few years. And if you think about it, it's only been 2 or 3 years since a lot of this really took off. I feel really hopeful about what can happen given how much has shifted just in the last few years. And I also don't think the fight is particularly over just yet. And there's still things that could happen this year or the next that could change the ballgame and open up all kinds of political realities in the future.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Varsh. I think if we look back, there has been, who would have thought that even, when we first met, Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez as a candidate, no one would have thought, that she would have been on the cover of Time and would have become one of the biggest legislators in the country. But that is because people are hungry for, representation that looks and sounds and is them. And, the only thing that we can do, like Varshini said, is to try. And unfortunately, the conditions with climate change are only going to continue to worsen. I think people, especially young people, can feel in their bones what's happening right now, and are looking for ways to engage. And so it's on, the movement, Justice Democrats, Sunrise Movement, the movement for Black Lives, to translate all of this energy that has been in the streets, that is right now being frustrated with all of the problems that this pandemic has put on hyperdrive, into, the mass movement that we need to actually take on, these legislators on Capitol Hill that are bought by massive fossil fuel companies and other multinational corporations. And that's the thing that gives me hope, is that, regardless of what way this goes, even if, we don't get Build Back Better passed, there's so much that we don't know that could happen, and that has happened because of this collective power that we've all done. And that's what Cori Bush, AOC, Jamal, all of them in Congress represent, is our collective power as a movement to overcome what people thought was impossible. So we don't know exactly what it'll look like, but I have a lot of faith in all of the people across the country, the ones we've interacted with and the ones we haven't yet, to be a part of this.
There's a quote that was done during the Q&A from Rihanna Gunright, which I'd like to ask you all what you think this applies to. It was a great quote. It says, politics are about who shows up. How do you feel about that statement? Rachel, we'll start with you.
Sure. And, that's a phrase that comes into the film a couple of times. Cori Bush comes to a rally of the Sunrise Movement and says, you have to show up, and not just by tweeting it out. You have to show up in person to be part of these on the ground actions. And then is also in one of my favorite scenes, when the leaders of Justice Democrats are speaking about just reckoning with their disappointment over the direction that the Build Back Better Act is going in, and talking about how do you stay committed to political work when it is such an uphill battle? And Amira Hassan, the political director of Justice Democrats, also talks about showing up, and she's talking about everything that you see in the film. There's so many ways to show up to this movement. People are showing up by organizing their communities. People are showing up by working on Justice Democrats campaigns. People are showing up by voting. People are showing up by doing hunger strikes. People are showing up by running for Congress and supporting others that are. People are showing up by building the community-based solutions to decarbonization that will have to be scaled up when we actually have the political will to enact these changes on a massive scale. People are showing up in labor campaigns throughout this country. It's not getting reported on as much in the mainstream media, but there's a really interesting amount of labor struggle going on right now. There's so many ways that you can show up to be part of a movement and this movement to build an alternative future. And my hope is that it, in spite of the disappointment in the ending of the legislative thread of the film, there's still a really strong sense that it's worth showing up, because we really have no choice. This is, those of us that are younger, or, I myself have a 5-year-old child, we don't have the luxury of cynically checking out and just saying whatever. We have to work for building the kind of world that we want to see.
Alexandra, did you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought and words, but yeah, I mean, I think if we don't show up, the fossil fuel companies, the special interests, and all of them will. And as Amira, to quote Amira again, our pettiness is what drives, but I mean, they have been, that is, the truth of it. And also because of the people and the things that we love and hold most dear. And that, unfortunately, is the reality. Like, in whatever amount that you believe in it, that could ever be a possibility, makes me want to, do what I do every day and do the work that we all do every day. So sorry, that didn't come out super eloquently.
That's great. It reminded, I cannot for the life of me remember who said this, and I feel bad, but I just keep thinking of that quote of like, kind of like those who, if you measure a country by how quiet or silent its people are in the injustices that are perpetrated of them, you can measure the level of you just like get a clear sense of the measure of how much they're willing to suffer. And to me, I think the level of resistance that we're seeing across the board, whether it's against gun violence or whether it's against white supremacy and police brutality or climate change, or against so many other issues, is a testament to the ways that people are showing up and the ways in which people are unwilling to suffer in silence and unwilling to support the direction that this country is headed in. I don't think it's enough people right now. And I think we need a lot more for us to stem the tide and to turn this country around. But I think it is a huge testament to the amount of movement building and organization that's already happened, that so many people are willing and ready to show up and willing to engage and be sort of like agents of defining our future.
So that brings me to my second to last question, and I hope you can hear me. My house is a bit loud. Varshini, you made an excellent point that I thought was very intuitive. You said in the beginning that you didn't like to watch the news because you felt like there was this grand epic things going on that you had no control over. When people watch this, they may feel that way. They may feel like there's corruption, or there's these ways, and it's empowering. The film's empowering because it sees you working and doing all that. But what would you say to somebody that watched this and said, I want to step up, I want to help, I want to be different?
Well, one, I say that's great, because I really feel like the first step is making that choice internally. And I think the step from I'm too small, or I'm too insignificant, or I'm not powerful enough, to I want to make a choice to try, is a huge transformation within a person. And so I think, like, for me, it was going from feeling insignificant and small to realizing there were small things I could do in my own life that would set me on a path to transforming my community. And when that didn't feel big enough, to transforming my state. And when that didn't feel big enough, to try to figure out how we could change US politics. But it never has to be like that for everyone. And actually, we need people who just want to transform their lives and the lives of people around them. And I think if we can get millions of people engaged in that effort, it could lead to huge transformations in the country. So I would say, make the choice internally, and then choose, like, just begin, like, take a step, do something. And whether that, there are two organizations right here that you can absolutely join, Justice Democrats, Sunrise, but take a step in that direction and make a choice. And for me, I didn't know that I would get to this point. If you had told me when I was 16, I would have been like, hell no, are you kidding me? But ultimately, it was just following a path and following my heart and following the work that I knew was valuable and important to me and to our society and our planet. And that's ultimately what brought me here today.
Alexandra?
Yeah, well, I'd say that makes sense, because I still, even this many years in, feel like it's too big. And I think if you're not feeling how, if you're not feeling like something's off in this moment, I think that is something to note. But I think, at least for me personally, I focus on a lot of the things that we can control. And like Varshini said, it doesn't have to be really big, like, let's transform US politics. It can be something much smaller, which is, just orienting, how do I change things in my own life to, like, start critically thinking about this and, like, the impact that I can have. And I think right now that is what is needed, is, like, showing up, obviously in the streets, but also in ways that are gonna, help the people that you love, that you're around, or the community that you're living in. And, just trying to get a start to do that is huge, especially in this moment. Because it doesn't have to look like, going into a documentary or running for Congress or all of this other stuff. It can just be like giving a shit about all of this stuff that's happening, and making sure that, your friends and family are aware, and researching, like, where it makes sense to dedicate your time and energy to. And I'd say, especially right now, where you see school boards, state legislatures, US Congress, like, this white nationalist movement, quite literally, infiltrating a lot of our offices, it's really critical that, we pay attention at all levels to who our leadership is and how we hold them accountable. I think, if anyone takes away anything from the film, on top of the hope, it's also who is clearly, Rachel said it best, we have the technical capacity to alleviate poverty, to alleviate the threats of the climate crisis, but we don't have the political will or people in power that are willing to do that. And so I think also turning your attention towards, not just the solutions of the crisis, but also the power structures that are halting progress is critical.
Perfect, thank you. Rachel, I have one final question for you. You get the final question.
Okay, yes. And unfortunately, we do have to wrap up soon. I'll try to be succinct.
So my final question is, what what is your next project? What are you going to focus on from here? There's so many things in politics, but what are you planning to tune into?
Well, truthfully, my next project is the impact campaign for To the End. So I'll be working with Varshini and Alexandra and hopefully a lot of other partner organizations to use the film as a tool to engage people in the fight for climate justice and at a lot of different levels. And that's basically where I'm at right now. I've got, kicking around a number of ideas for future film projects, but I think we've got our hands full for a little while with the release of this film and the impact campaign. So I'm very excited to get into that with everyone.
Excellent. Thank you so much, all of you. This was fantastic. I really appreciate it. This is Nadia, the Melanin Gifted movie critic, and I am signing off.